Welcome to Instructional Design and Resiliency. I am Dr. Leslie Bofill. I am, actually our bios are in the following slides. But Derek, would you like to say a few words before we move on to the outline?
Sure. Just wanted to say thank you all again for showing up, and we're real excited to talk about this subject, especially during this time that we've been through, with the pandemic and everything. I'm sure it'll be a great informative piece for us and a great conversation topic. So here's our presentation outline. We've got the first thing we're going to do is we're going to lead in with a question, and that's going to be on the next slide. We're going to do a little bit of a presenter introduction so that you can learn a little bit more about me and Dr. Bofill. We're going to talk about the history of instructional design, kind of where it came from, and then we're going to switch gears and get into the evolution of instructional design, make some notes and talk about some things that we've noticed on our end, and maybe get a little bit of feedback on what y'all have noticed on your end. Then we're going to start talking about some of our favorite pedagogies and frameworks. And I know that as I was studying instructional design, I just came across so many. So we're not going to cover them all, but we do have a couple that I think are really excellent and serve as a foundation piece for us moving forward. Then we're going to try to connect it all together and talk about how our experience and where instructional design is, how it connects back to Miami-Dade College, and then at the end we're gonna round it out with a conversation about resiliency, and then offer a little time for a Q&A. So the session is meant to last until 10:50, and depending on how the interaction goes, we'll make sure that we wrap this up by no later than 11. And the question here that we want to know is, who has worked with an instructional designer before? So we have a poll that just popped up. If you have an opportunity, it'd be great for you to provide your feedback. It's actually surprising to me that we have 7 people out of our group that hasn't worked with an instructional designer before. So hopefully we make a very strong impression, and that we can start to maybe develop a working relationship to where we can get to know more about you, and then you can get to know more about the field of instructional design. So Dr. Bofill, what do you think? Do we want to open it up a little bit?
Yeah, so we wanted to ask one of you who said yes to share that experience. So which, feel free to unmute yourself, open up your mic and share that experience with us. And Derek and I were talking about this yesterday. We want to hear both positive and negative experiences, because we want to know, how that was, from a totally honest perspective. So if any of you want to kind of share what it was that you did with your instructional designer, what the process was like for you, please.
Don't worry, won't judge you. No, this is a judge-free zone where you can speak freely, and even though it is recorded, I mean, I guess our goal was, we just want to hear about what your interaction was like, and both good or bad, I think. Or if maybe what your expectations might be for future work with an instructional designer.
Yeah, if you haven't worked with one, let us know what kind of what you're hoping to get from that experience.
We do have a comment, and the comment was from Carla Clark. It says, "I don't have my mic connected, but my experience has been positive." We really appreciate that.
Excellent.
So if I may ask a question, in what capacity would you see a faculty using an instructional designer, or an instructor using an instructional designer? Could you give me some examples?
Sure. So I would say, like in our current circumstances, right, where a lot of faculty have had to take their content and make it work online. That can be a very challenging experience when you've been accustomed to teaching in person and working that way, where you might have a more traditional format, handing out papers and creating group experiences in the classroom. And that can be hard to replicate in the digital arena. So one of the things that I think instructional designers excel at is solving problems very quickly, but also being open and creative and talking through things. So, you know, one of the things that I do is I work with technology quite a bit. And so I'm one of those people that if you need something done, I can help you get it figured out. And I think that that's been really very useful in our current landscape, right?
Absolutely. Navigating this Blackboard in this situation initially was a challenge.
Yeah.
It's getting better, but it was a challenge.
Yeah. And you know, to add to that, we've seen that Miami-Dade really has shifted its focus to the role of the instructional designer. And you know, we all are last year where we spent a couple weeks with faculty preparing for that transition because of the pandemic. I think that was a lot of faculty's first experience with instructional designers at Dade. And you know, this year we're getting ready to develop the design your spring break, where you know faculty really kind of spend time developing their courses for summer. And so you know, it doesn't surprise me to see we got some more no's than yeses now, Derek, and I think that's kind of more what in line with what we were expecting to see. There's a lot more of our faculty who have not yet worked with instructional designers. But we're definitely seeing a shift towards that direction. And, you know, as instructional designers, we're really grateful that we're seeing the role of the instructional designer at Miami-Dade really come forth and seeing the organization support it, because it plays such an integral role in, you know, obviously the topic of today, which is resiliency, but also really just improving and enhancing the student experience with their courses. You know, and just one final word before we move on, you know, as we talk today about what instructional design is and the role of the instructional designer and how it can support faculty, you know, we want you to think that this is not just because this is driven by the pandemic. You know, instructional designers can also help you enhance your content, your materials, your teaching modalities in the classroom. So once we all go back to normal, that instructional designer can help you create engaging content and engaging lessons for your in-class sessions as well. So think of that instructional designer as being able, you know, to extend what it is that you do in the classroom, not just in the online environment as well. So I think we can move on, Derek, to the next slide.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oops.
sorry.
Sorry. You control the PowerPoint. You control
Okay,
the PowerPoint.
sorry about that. We got excited.
Yeah,
So
we
excited.
So, all right.
Go ahead.
Are we on the right slide? So it's me. I'm Dr. Leslie Wolfill. I am the Associate Director of Learning Resources at the Padrone campus. As I see some names, I know I've worked with some of you already, and it's great to see you here. I am an instructional designer. I have been working as an instructional designer for over 15 years. I have a couple of degrees, but I put the degrees related to instructional design. I have a master's in instructional design for online learning. I got that quite a few years ago. And I also have a PhD in computing technology and education, which is, you know, they put that computing in front because it was a computer science program with a track in instructional design. And I was fortunate enough to do my dissertation with an instructional design focus. I am on campus most of the time, so you know, if you're ever on campus and you want to visit learning resources, please do. I'm in the first floor of the 6000 building, but I'm also available online. So you know, we will share our contact information with you today. If you're interested in learning more about this, as always, please reach out to me.
All right, I'm gonna hit the next slide
Yes.
here. So that's me. I'm Derek Dorsett. Nice to meet y'all. We've got an extra bullet point there, if you can notice. That's because I'm going to have to make something up real quick. But no, I'm part of the We Learn 366 Institute, and I just moved to Miami about 2.5 months ago from Texas. I'm real excited to be here. The weather is fantastic so far, and of course, I love the beach. The We Learn 366 is a grant-funded position, and it's an institute on campus. We're in the process of building it out and putting together, you know, what it is that exactly that we're going to offer as far as products and services. And it's been a very exciting time because our grant, was actually had a lot to do with, you know, learning online and blended learning specifically. And the grant was actually written before the pandemic happened, so it was kind of what you might call fortuitous. I've lived and worked in South Korea for a couple years, so I threw that out there just because I love South Korea so much. I think it's an exciting place to be, and I highly recommend it to anybody who hasn't gone. And the last thing is, I have a Master of Science in Instructional Design and Educational Technology, but I'm currently working on a PhD in Learning Technologies from the University of North Texas, and I'm just so excited to be here with y'all. So we'll move on to the next slide.
Mhm.
So what is instructional design? This is a very good question to ask, especially in today's environment, because what I've noticed, and I think what a lot of instructional designers have noticed, is that the field has started to develop kind of subfields, and that some of the things that an instructional designer might do at one university, they are asked to do something differently at another university. Like, for example, you might go see an instructional designer at MDC Online, the virtual campus, and your experience with them may be different than the experience that you have with an instructional designer at CIOL, or even like the instructional design work that's done at Learning Resources, or even We Learn 366. So it's important for us to understand the varieties of the field, and so we put this down just so that we could talk about it a little bit. You know, I've seen UX instructional designers that are asked to focus more specifically on how students interact with content and learning management systems. UX, user experience, and user interface design, those are new fields that I think are really growing into instructional design as a whole, and it's something that I find very exciting. I love the idea of understanding how students interact with content, especially when we start to talk about how much technology plays a part in our current learning field. So it's something that I've seen, and it's something I think that's going to continue to grow. I've also seen multimedia instructional designers where they're asked to get more involved with the creation of content, like as far as filming goes, or different things that go along with that. I mean, traditionally you might see somebody who focuses exclusively on filming, and they're not necessarily an instructional designer. But what I found and what I see more often is that these two fields are somewhat merging and creating this somewhat new discipline. And that's another thing that I think is going to be a very exciting component of what I know We Learn is working towards. Then you have educational technologists, and an educational technologist, based on my experience, is someone who maybe focuses more on the back end of stuff. Someone who, like, I worked at UT Arlington, and an educational technologist there, a lot of times they would do stuff that maybe IT might do at some campuses. Like they would answer tickets or try to solve bugs or different things like that within the learning management system. Sometimes you might see an educational technologist set up a course. You might see them just do different things. So it's a field. It's not instructional design, but very much related to it. I mean, I guess you could say it's not instructional design in the word itself, but I believe that an instructional designer could probably accomplish those goals as well. The last thing that I've seen more recently is this developer and instructional designer type of role, and this is a much more technical field. And as programming and the ability to write codes, whether it be Python or JavaScript or these things, these very technical and complicated things develop, the instructional designer is asked to take on a bigger role in that. Now, personally, I'm not great at it. I've tried JavaScript a couple times, and for whatever reason, I'm just not built that way. So, it is a challenging field, but it's something that I've seen a few times. I've seen that in a job description. And I guess one last point is I've heard of a learning designer or a learning experience designer. And in my opinion, that very much aligns with what instructional design is about as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's exciting that this field is continuing to grow. And yeah, thank y'all for for listening to me for that long time. I'm gonna change slides and we'll switch gears just a little bit, okay? Dr. Bofill, are you available?
I am here. Sorry about that. I said, hi,
That's
Derek.
okay.
Thanks for that. So very briefly, a history of instructional design, and it's important just to cover it. And I think Derek can attest to this, is that instructional designers, when you tell someone you're an instructional designer, one, they don't know what it is that you do. They expect you to be an expert on everything, and that's not our role. But also, there's kind of this, kind of negative perception of instructional design as not being its own meritorious discipline or field. And looking back at how instructional design was developed, I think understanding where it came from does give it some definitely some legitimacy. So instructional design actually originated, which doesn't surprise me, but I find super cool. Is originated in the U.S. military during World War II, and it is absolutely fascinating to dive into this and understand how much of learning and learning psychology originated in the U.S. military. So this goes back, way before the 70s. They've already started working, or the U.S. military started working with educational psychologists. So sometime in the early 70s, the U.S. military, after they had recruited educational psychologists to develop training materials, they started looking at a process or a set of procedures to ensure learning, design, and evaluation. And up until the 70s, they had about 40 models. By 1975, which as a graduate of Florida State makes me like super proud, the ADDIE model was developed by the Naval Training Center in collaboration with the Florida State University. And, not to take too much time of this, the original model was a very rigid kind of waterfall. It had multiple steps. You had to follow them all in line. And, this really kind of still reflects on what we think of the instructional design process today, that it's this very rigid process and you have to follow every step of the process. But that's not really how it is. It really has evolved from what it was in 1975 to what it is today. And so the image on the left is the current ADDIE process, and we kind of like to really refer to it as a process, as a workflow, because while it is circular, you start with analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. The reality is at any given step, you can go backwards and forwards and backwards again. So it's a very, 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 very flexible process. There are a lot more. And Derek and I talked about how much do we want to mention. There are more than these, and the field of instructional design probably has today, thankfully, limited them to about 4 or 5. Software development has its own instructional design guided process. And so we have a question. So Dr. Brenda Lopez, you have a question?
Yes, hi, I'm Brenda Lopez and I work currently as instructional designer at Florida International University. I have been a student of instructional design for a while now, and I remember reading a lot articles from different very prominent people in our field saying that there was no way they could track the beginnings of the ADDIE model. And so I was wondering if you could share the, if you have a reference where the information you provided in the previous slide is available.
Totally, absolutely.
That would be awesome.
I am going to put my email so you can remind me. I have a reference because this is actually from my dissertation. So I did, my dissertation, I did it on using an instructional design process, ADDIE, to develop medical school curriculum. I won't go into the details. And part of it was establishing the ethos of instructional design in medical education, because you still, you didn't see it back then when I did it, which wasn't that long ago. And you really don't still see it now. So I did a lot of research on when the ADDIE process, how it came to be, in order to really give it that legitimacy for what it is that I'm going to be doing, that I did. So I've shared my email in the chat. Please send me an email and I'm happy to share those resources with you.
Thank you so much.
I do have those references. Yeah, absolutely. because that was definitely a criticism, right? We don't know when ADDIE started, and so how is there legitimacy to this thing when we don't know where it began, how it began? But yeah, it's very much connected to the U.S. military in Florida State. So that was a really great find. So as I was saying, and thank you for that question. So right now, instructional design now has limited this to like 4 or 5 models. And so, Derek, you want to very quickly, I can share my screen and you can talk about Mayors, which is another great one.
Absolutely. So I know we've got about 5 minutes left and we still got a few slides. So the thing is, and I'm just going to touch on it. So the Mayor is I believe he's a cognitive psychologist or an educational psychologist. And he has these 12 principles that have been tested. And they're just great tips for making educational videos. So we put the link, I think we've put the link in, or if we haven't, we're going to, but I encourage you to check it out. Other than that, because this session is going, we're talking about so much stuff. It's so exciting. Unfortunately, we just don't have time to go through all of these, but yeah, I'm going to put my contact information in there as well. So feel free to check it out and yeah, email me if you'd like to talk about it. I'd love to go into more depth about it, but I think that just about covers what we can cover right now. So
yeah, we'll go through this one very quickly, Derek. We only have 2 more slides in Q&A, so maybe we could fly through these.
Okay. Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit already, but I'm from the We Learn 366 Institute. It's a newly funded, grant-funded position, and there's a couple things that we're going to be doing, and one of them is a content creation lab. Super excited about it. We're going to be doing some animation, some filming. We've got this, we're putting together a Surface Studio 2 that's like this huge monitor for screencasting. It's going to be top notch, and I'm really excited to work with some faculty on that. But you'll hear more about it in the coming months. But yeah, that's my little plug right there.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be if you're an instructional designer, or if you're a faculty who wants to work with an instructional designer. Learning Resources is really kind of refocusing some of its efforts as well. So how does We Learn work with Learning Resources? We Learn is the faculty support side of instructional design. Our tutors and myself are really working with the student side. So Derek and I and Belkis as well, the director of We Learn, have been in conversations for quite some time about how we can collaborate to support students and faculty. So as Derek mentioned, you are definitely going to get more information on that. Learning Resources has a speech lab. We're currently also rolling out an audio-video recording space for students to come and develop really great materials for their courses, for their speech classes, for their education classes. So there's a lot of growth going on right now in support of instructional design and the role that they play. So our final slide is really a question to you all. If you want to discuss how the pandemic has impacted you as an educator. And this is really where we see the growth and kind of that big push for instructional designers. So we've seen, as a result of the pandemic, the growth of instructional design as a profession. Unfortunately, online learning stopped being a choice last March. We all had to make, kind of run with it and go into online learning, whether we wanted to or not. I know there's been a bit more flexibility with FIU. They still were offering on-campus courses, and we saw that date as well with courses that required labs and practicums and things like that. But the final point is a very good point that Derek made in our conversations, which is that the business model for education has forever changed, and that really means we have to offer flexibility. And how we do that efficiently and impacting outcomes in a positive way is by really collaborating with instructional designers and having kind of like that support model to support faculty, support students with the guidance of instructional designers. Derek, you want to add anything?
No, I just think it's been an excellent session, and I'm really excited and happy that we had this time to talk about instructional design with y'all. I think we're right at 2:59. Sorry.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. I want to just remind everyone that you have an opportunity to fill out the survey to just give us some feedback. I am attaching the link to the chat So if you could just kindly click on that and make sure that you leave your feedback. In addition to that, we want to encourage you to go back to the homepage of our Teaching and Learning Symposium website or LibGuide, and take a look at the other sessions that are coming next. Thank you again once more, and thank you both for doing an excellent job of talking to us about what instructional design is and what it looks like and how we can apply it to our field.
Thank you, Anna.
Thanks, everybody. Happy Friday.
Thank you all for attending.